Hi, welcome to the Skill Bar. My name is Carl McLean, a game designer here at ArenaNet. Today we're going to talk about up-and-coming balance changes. The first change we're going to talk about today is Power Wrench. Power Wrench previously delivered crippling blows with your auto attack and your throw wrench ability. This has been folded into the baseline of your toolkit, and so now you don't actually have to equip this trait in order to maintain that crippling effect. Instead, Power Wrench has been changed to have a 10% damage increase while using the toolkit. Your combo, your pry bar, and your throw wrench abilities will all deal bonus damage now. The next trait we're going to talk about is Always Prepared. Previously, this trait only dropped bandages for your allies to pick up. Now we've added oil slicks so that when you go down, you'll drop a protective ring of oil slicks that will knock enemies down when they enter them. Elite Supplies. This trait no longer grants increased duration while using Elixir X. Instead, you're now going to get 50% extra move speed. As you can see, Tornado has been changed to be a lightning field. Now you're going to be able to launch Whirling Bolts, as it is also a whirling combo. Accelerant Pack Turrets. This trait's knockback distance has been reduced by 50%, making it go from a 300 range knockback to a 150 range knockback. The intent of this trait is more to cause disruption amongst your enemies, rather than controlling the area through massive knockbacks. Alright, now we're going to get into some skills. Rocket Turret. So the impact of the explosive rockets previously it was a bit hard to hit for the Rocket Turret. We wanted to increase the overall reliability of this skill, and so now the velocity has been slightly increased, and you're going to notice that it actually tracks the targets now. Check this out. Flamethrower. We've had a few adjustments on the flamethrower this time around. We have increased the damage of the flame jet by about 33% because it was just not on par with a lot of other skills. The Flame Blast Detonate, the actual detonation portion of this ability, has been changed to be a blast finisher. So now that you're going to be able to launch a field and then actually fire this skill into it for an additional blast. Flame Wall. This ability now delivers strikes on each pulse. Air Blast. We have increased the cast time of this by about a quarter of a second. And so now it's going to be have a little bit more delay to it, whereas, and it's also been given a little bit more of a tell through the effects. You're going to see a little bit more of a wind up from this ability now. Elixir R. The cast time of this ability has been reduced by about a quarter of a second. In addition to refilling your endurance, you're now going to remove Immobilize when you're using this ability. Elixir C. The number of conditions affected by this skill has been increased from 1 to 2 for all allies affected by it. Launch Personal Battering Ram. This toolbutt skill has had its damage increased by 20%. Medkit Drop Antidote. Have you ever dropped this thing right in front of your face when you've been immobilized? Good news! If you use this ability while you are immobilized, it will remove that condition. Utility Goggles. Analyze. This ability now applies 6 seconds of reveal in addition to the vulnerability that it applies. Glue Shot. We increased the velocity of this projectile by 50%. AED. We felt that this ability was slightly underperforming, being as you have to make such a huge sacrifice in order to attain that uber healing effect. So we wanted to reward that just a little bit more, and also make it so that you're not going to die quite as fast if you actually hit that threshold. So this ability will now remove all damaging conditions when you hit that threshold of you would have taken a fatal blow thing. So let's get going and talk about the Ranger. The first thing we want to talk about here is the trait Signet of the Beastmaster. This Signet sort of like hampered the way that the Rangers could spec, because if they wanted to use Signets, the only way they could really make them truly useful was to go into the Grandmaster line for marksmanship and get this trait. We didn't feel like that was really fair in terms of like making builds, and so we have changed this trait. This trait is no longer Signet of the Beastmaster. Your Signets now have those effects baseline. So your Signet of Stone will now affect your pet and yourself. Your Signet of the Hunt will affect your pet and yourself. Likewise with the other ones. So the trait that has replaced Signet of the Beastmaster is now called Predator's Onslaught. This trait increases your damage to movement-inhibited opponents. So the trait basically reads, you and your pet deal bonus damage to enemies suffering from movement-impeding conditions. This means crippled, chilled, and immobilized. The damage bonus from this trait is 10% for yourself and 5% for your pet. Next trait we want to talk about is Read the Wind. In addition to increasing the velocity of your arrows when you're wielding a longbow, it's going to actually increase your attack speed. This means you'll be able to fire off arrows at a faster rate than you would without the trait. Next up is Strider's Defense. We've increased the percent to block from 15% to 20%. On to the Beast Mastery line. We felt that the Beast Mastery line was limiting in a lot of ways, and that the master traits required you to have specific pets in order to actually take a lot of the traits that were somewhat useful. We removed a lot of the specificity from it, meaning that you can use this trait with any pet you have. So, for example, Rending Attacks now actually bleeds with any pet crit on their basic attack. Stability Training, likewise, will activate with any pet you have. And lastly, Intimidation Training now applies Cripple on any of your pet's F2 skills that have a strike on them. So, now that we're done talking about traits, let's talk about the skills themselves. For the longbow during this balance pass, we wanted to sort of kind of tighten up some of the cast times and make it so that it's easier to use during a skirmish or during a fight, and so you're not sort of stuck casting one thing for a long period of time. With that, let's go through some of the skills. Long range shot. We wanted to tighten up some of the damage components of this. So at short range, it dealt really subpar damage. So we've increased that by about 17%. Similarly, the medium tier was doing a little bit subpar damage. It wasn't all that great. So we've increased that by about 7%. Whereas with the long range, we felt like that one actually did a decent... It does a good job of dealing its damage. And so we left that one as is, and so that portion will be receiving no damage increase. Rapid Fire. So, this skill was a little bit harder to use because you were stuck casting it for about 5 seconds at a time. So what we've done is we've actually reduced the cast time of it by about 50%. Behold! It's actually pretty fun to use right about now. It does a decent amount of damage, and it's actually, you feel like you got a little bit more spike available to you. Next up is Barrage. So we wanted to reduce the amount of time spent casting this while leaving its effectiveness about the same. So we've reduced its cast time by about half a second. Next on the list today is Greatsword. So for the combo, we've left it mostly the same. The damage of Power Stab, which is the third strike of the skill, that damage has been increased by about 10%. Next on the list is Maul. So what we've done for this skill is we've increased the maximum amount of targets it can hit from 3 to 5, while increasing its radius from 150 to 220 units. Swoop now evades on the attack portion of the ability, meaning if you're traveling to a target, while you're still running you can still be struck. But once you enter your attack animation where you're swinging your blade, you are actually evading. Counterattack has had its aftercast reduced, meaning you'll be able to respond much more quickly after landing your knockback blow. Hilt Bash. The stun and daze durations of this skill have been increased from 1 second to 1.5 seconds. Sick'em. This utility skill now applies 6 seconds of revealed to enemies. Entangle. The recharge of this ability has been reduced from 150 seconds down to 60 seconds. Likewise, the duration of the roots themselves have been decreased from 20 seconds down to 5, meaning you'll be able to use this ability much more frequently. Let's talk about the axe. Ricochet now grants Might on hit. It's 3 seconds base. As you can see with mine, I'm up to about 4 seconds because I have a little bit extra Might duration. Meaning that this ability is going to be much more useful against multiple targets than against just one target. With this new addition, you're going to want to bounce your weapon off of as many opponents as possible, giving you the maximum amount of Might stacks. Path of Scars. The velocity of this projectile has been increased by 25%, meaning you're going to be able to land that attack much easier than before. Now on to the pets. There haven't been that many pet changes this time around, but we wanted to tell you about a couple of the ones that we're talking about. The Black Bear's enfeebling roar has been slightly changed so that it no longer goes through blocking and evading, but now delivers a strike, which can be useful for things like rending attacks and intimidation training. Similarly, the Polar Bear has received the same sort of rework on its icy roar, in that his roar will now deliver a physical attack. Let's talk about the Thief. To start, we'll talk about the trait changes. Panic Strike. We felt that the duration of immobilization was a little bit too long on this trait, being as it would be 5.25 seconds or something like that baseline when you equipped it. So we have reduced the duration of immobilize from this trait from 5 seconds to 2.5 seconds. Likewise, we have also reduced the cooldown from 30 seconds to 20 seconds, meaning you'll be able to use it more often, but it'll have a little bit less effectiveness against a single target. Invigorating Precision. We felt that this trait was somewhat underperforming, being it was only 5% of your outgoing critical hit damage. So this trait has been increased from 5% to 8% of your critical hit damage returned as health to you. Ricochet. So in addition to bouncing your pistol shots, this trait will now increase the range of your pistol shots, meaning that you'll be able to take the max range of your pistols from 900 to 1050. In addition, there's been some bug fixes to how Ricochet works. There is some odd bugs on how the bounces occurred, so it'll bounce a little bit more reliably now. Assassin's Equilibrium. The amount of stability this trait grants has been increased from 1 second to 1.5 seconds. Venomous Aura. The way that this trait functions has been slightly altered. Previously, if you applied venom to an ally, they applied conditions as though they were their own. So, like Torment from the warrior that you gave the aura to would apply through the warrior's condition stats, which, when there are things like Berserkers, you don't get a whole lot of condition damage out of it. Now, when you use Venomous Aura, you're going to be using your own stats. Similarly, healing effects such as Skelk Venom or Leeching Venoms will also use the Thief's healing power. Basilisk Venom, however, remains as an interrupt through the target you have applied the venom to. So a Mesmer using halting strikes and actually getting an interrupt with the venom will still apply their halting strike. Now let's move on to some weapon skills. First off, let's talk about the Thief's Daggers set. Double Strike, Wild Strike, and Lotus Strike will now hit up to 2 targets. Previously, the weapon set could only hit 1 target, and it was a little bit difficult when it came to fighting like pets or in areas where you need to attack multiple things at once. So the offensive portions of these skills will apply to all enemies struck, while the defensive measures, such as endurance gain from Wild Strike, will only apply once. Black Powder. The intervals of this skill have been increased from 1 to 2 seconds, while the duration of the blind applied has been decreased to 2 seconds. Note that the projectile still applies 2 seconds of blind. Unload. The cast time of this ability has been reduced from 1 3/4 seconds to 1.5 seconds for an overall 20% reduction. In addition, your Ambush Trap and Thieves Guild summoned creatures will also have this same reduction. Choking Gas. This ability now has a small strike when impacting the ground, meaning that when you're in stealth, when the ability hits the ground, you'll be brought out and revealed. In addition, however, you'll be able to do things like apply your on-crit procs or your venoms to enemies with this ability. Flanking Strike. So the initiative of Flanking Strike and Larcenous Strike have been altered slightly. Flanking Strike has gone up from 3 to 4 initiative cost, while Larcenous Strike has gone down from 2 to 1 cost. Also, Flanking Strike now requires a hit in order to turn over to Larcenous Strike, meaning that you can evade multiple times, but it will cost you a bit more in initiative. And that's it for the Thief today. On to the Warrior. We've reworked how the Warrior uses their adrenaline. Currently, your adrenaline is only ever consumed if you hit your skill. So like if you miss an Eviscerate, you don't worry because 8 seconds later or 10 seconds later it's going to be up again. We have changed how this functionality works, meaning that if you miss your adrenaline and dump skills, your burst abilities, you will lose your adrenaline. Additionally, your adrenaline will now decay the moment you leave combat. So it's more beneficial for you to actually use your adrenaline skills instead of carrying your adrenaline from fight to fight. Let's cover a couple of the trait changes. Rousing Resilience will now give you up to 8 seconds of bonus toughness, up from its previous 4 seconds. Brawler's Recovery will now remove a single condition on weapon swap rather than just the blind condition. The Warrior's Greatsword has seen a couple of changes into where its damage is placed. 100 Blades has been reduced by 5% for the initial strikes, with the final strike of 100 Blades remaining the same. Whirlwind Attack has also seen the same 5% damage reduction. With that being the case, you will see a new rendition of Arcing Slice. This ability is more executioner style now, in that it will deal damage to 5 targets in an area, and it will deal bonus damage to enemies that are below 50% health. Signet of Rage. The boon duration of this ability has been reduced by 5 seconds, meaning that your Fury, Might, and Swiftness is only going to last for 25 seconds base, whereas the adrenaline gain has been increased by 50%, meaning you're going to be getting a little bit more adrenaline every time the Signet pulses. Bleeding Shot. This ability no longer bleeds enemy targets, and has been renamed to Fierce Shot, which has a 20% damage increase and will give you extra adrenaline strikes when you hit an enemy that is suffering from vulnerability. Whirling Axe, your Axe Offhand number 5 skill. The damage of this ability has been increased by 17%, and the cooldown of the ability has been reduced to 15 seconds. Pulverize. This is the 3rd strike of your mace combo, and it's had its cast time reduced by 25%. Impale. This offhand sword skill previously had 100% and over 100% uptime of Torment. We felt like this was a little bit too much for the ability, and we have reduced the overall duration of Torment from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. Signet of Might. We've changed the way that Signet of Might makes your attacks unblockable. Instead of 5 attacks of being unblockable, you'll now have 6 seconds to deliver as many unblockable attacks as you can. Berserker Stance. Previously, this stance gave just a little bit under 5 full bars of adrenaline, which is a lot. This effect has been reduced by about 40%, meaning you're going to be able to get about a full 3 bars of adrenaline during the course of this stance. Banners. We've altered the sprint ability for all banners to no longer give an attack at the end of the sprint. Instead, you're going to move both crippled and chilled effects and sprint forward a certain distance. Rampage. We wanted this ability to feel a little bit more like you're a juggernaut when you enter that transform state. So we have reduced the amount of incoming physical damage you can take by 25%, meaning that all strikes that you take are going to be reduced. And then all incoming chilled, crippled, and immobilized conditions are going to be reduced by another 33%. So meaning that if you have Dogged March and this ability, you're going to be suffering from almost no movement impeding conditions. We've also increased the velocity of Throw Boulder, so that it'll be a little bit easier for you to land a stun against ranged enemies. First off, we'll start with talking about the Mesmer. We're going to cover traits first here, so let's hop right on in. Triumphant Distortion. This dueling trait previously granted distortion to the Mesmer when you attained a kill. In addition to this effect, you will also now receive 1 second of distortion on all of your phantasms that are summoned. Illusionary Elasticity. Your clones that use Winds of Chaos will now be affected by this trait. Maim the Disillusioned. We've increased the amount of torment inflicted from 4 seconds to 6 seconds. Now let's go talk about some weapon skills. Illusionary Leap. We've changed the way this clone is summoned so that it's now going to summon on your target's position instead of at your position, meaning that you'll have a much faster response time between illusionary leaps and illusionary swaps. Illusionary Warden. We fixed a bug with his Phantasm that caused it to fail its attacks occasionally when he was attached to a melee enemy. Mind Stab. The damage of this ability has been increased by 17%, and its radius has been increased to 240. So with the Mesmer's Scepter, we wanted it to take more of a condition roll. And in order to do that, we feel like the auto attack needs to have some sort of a condition attached to it, so that the clones can have their own condition application. As such, we've reworked some of the Scepter's abilities, and they will now apply Torment on each strike. So, Ether Bolt will now apply 2 seconds of Torment on each attack. Ether Blast will apply 4 seconds of Torment. Ether Clone will create clones that deal 2 seconds of Torment on their base attacks. Mantra of Pain. So with the defensive mantras, we like that they have an AoE nature to them. And so we would like to extend this out into the offensive mantras as well. With that, Mantra of Pain Power Spike is being increased to a 5-target, 240 radius area effect attack. Similarly, Mantra of Distraction's Power Lock is going to be able to hit 5 targets at a 180 radius attack. Last but not least, Mimic. We felt that this ability was a little bit too difficult to use in most circumstances, so we reworked it a bit. And now it's going to copy all boons and their durations from an enemy you target, making for pretty good combos with Null Field or Arcane Thievery. And now on to the Elementalist. Let's start off with traits. Blinding Ashes. This trait has been modified slightly so that it will now apply blinding to all enemies struck by skills that burn in an area. Next up is Lightning Rod. This trait now triggers on any form of a disable rather than only when you interrupt an enemy, meaning that things like your Earthquake or your Static Field will always activate this trait. Last up is Elemental Contingency. Previously, this trait was very much hindered by its cooldown, being that it shared the same cooldown for all attunements. Now, each attunement will have its own separate cooldown, meaning that Earth will be separate from Water, which is separate from Air, and so forth. Now let's talk about some of the Balance 2 Elementalist elite skills. Tornado and Whirlpool previously would increase your power levels massively when you entered them, meaning that any lingering spells you had outside would deal bonus damage. We felt like this was a little bit unfair and really hard to read, so we've changed the power scales of these elite transforms so that they will no longer increase spell effects that you have outside of there. The damage of each skill for Tornado has been normalized so that you'll do at the same or more damage when this change rolls through. Fiery Greatsword's Fiery Rush has been reworked. We wanted to take the damage from the trail portion into the actual ending skill, where you actually swing your sword. So we've reduced the damage from the trail by about 70%, while increasing the damage of your ending strike by about 140%. Overall, you'll see much less damage on the trail, and a lot more damage on the ending strike. Along with these changes, Fiery Rush, Burning Speed, and Burning Retreat will no longer be able to create multiple fields on top of one another when rolling against a wall. Glyph of Lesser Elementals and Glyph of Elementals now have secondary abilities that you can activate. When pressed, the Elementals will activate these skills on their next skill usage. This allows you to have just a little bit more control when using these elementals. Glyph of Storms. We wanted this glyph to have more of a condition feel to it, so we've added conditions to both the fire and air versions of the ability. Firestorm will now apply 1 second of burning on each target it hits, and Airstorm will apply 2 stacks of vulnerability for 8 seconds on each target it hits. As you can see here, vulnerability can stack up really high really fast. Signet of Earth now applies 5 stacks of bleeding for 7 seconds when used. Signet of Fire has had its base damage increased by 100%. Signet of Water has had its recharge reduced to 25 seconds. Likewise, Signet of Air has had its recharge reduced to 25 seconds. Lastly, Vapor Form has had a visual update to indicate the difference between itself and Mist Form. The reasoning for this is that Mist Form is completely immune to crowd controls, whereas Vapor Form can actually be struck with them. Let's begin today with the Guardian and their traits. Elite Focus. In addition to its current functionality, this trait will now grant stability while using tome skills. Each tome will gain stability when it gains its associated boon, either protection or retaliation. Glacial Heart. We wanted this trait to be usable more frequently in combat, so the recharge has been reduced to 15 seconds. The chill duration has been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. Eternal Spirit. This trait has been reworked and renamed to Expeditious Spirit, which will now reduce the cooldown of activated abilities for your spirit weapons. Why am I saying this? Because spirit weapons have had their functionality reworked slightly. With this upcoming feature pack, you will no longer lose your spirit weapon when you activate their command ability. Instead, they will naturally be able to use their abilities more than once before dying. Let's talk about some of the upcoming changes to command skills for the Guardian spirit weapons. Hammer of Wisdom now has a blast finisher when activated. Sword of Justice applies 5 stacks of vulnerability to all enemies struck. Shield of the Avenger will now bounce to allied targets and apply Aegis to them. Bow of Truth. This ability has become ground targeted and can now be cast at up to 1200 range. Merciful Intervention. This ability is now a 180 radius ground targeted skill that will shadow step the Guardian to an ally in the targeted area, healing allies around the Guardian. Note that if there are no allies in the targeted area, you will not shadow step. Renewed Focus. This elite skill is now categorized as a meditation and will function with Meditation Mastery, Focus Mind, and Monk's Focus. In addition to the added effects of Elite Focus, tomes have had some of their skills slightly updated. For Tome of Wrath, Conflagrate has had its damage increased by 10%. Judgment has had its cast time reduced by 1.5 seconds. When paired with Judge's Fervor, this ability activates really quickly. For the Tome of Courage, Purifying Ribbon has had the number of conditions that it removes increase from 1 to 2 on each hit. And that's all for the Guardian. Let's move on to the Necromancer. First off, let's talk about the Necromancer's traits. Last Gasp in the Soul Reaping line is now categorized as a spectral skill and will be reduced and buffed by spectral traits. Additionally, the recharge has been reduced from 60 seconds to 50 seconds. Next up is Unholy Sanctuary in the Necromancer's Death Magic line. In addition to healing, this trait will now activate Death Shroud if you have enough life force when you would take a lethal blow, meaning that an attack that would kill you or a condition that would kill you will now activate your Death Shroud for you. A couple of things to note is that the trait has a 30-second internal cooldown, and if the trait triggers, even if your Death Shroud is on cooldown, it will circumvent that cooldown. Death Shroud itself has received some changes. Necromancers will now be able to interact with things while in Death Shroud, meaning you can resurrect allies or finish downed enemies. Corrupt Boon. The cast time of this ability has been increased by about a quarter second, bringing the skill up to about a total of 1/2 second cast time. This change also reduces the aftercast of Corrupt Boon by about a quarter second. Signet of Vampirism. The active time of this ability has been increased from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. Spectral Armor. As with the Last Gasp trait, the recharge of this ability has been reduced from 60 seconds to 50 seconds. Rending Claws. The aftercast of this ability has been reduced by about a quarter second, meaning that you can activate new abilities or repeat Rending Claws much quicker than you could before. Ghastly Claws. The damage of this ability has been increased by 10%. Necrotic Slash, Stab, and Bite have all had their number of targets increased from 1 to 2, meaning you'll have a slight cleaving effect on your dagger attack abilities. As with the Thief, the positive effects from these abilities can only occur once per swing. Locust Swarm. The duration of swiftness on this ability has been increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. And last but not least, let's talk about Lich Form. The overall duration of this transform was a little bit long, so we've reduced it from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. As with other transforms throughout all the professions, we've reduced its power scale down to the player's normal power scale. To compensate for this, we have increased the damage multipliers of each of the Lich's abilities to be about what they were before this change. This change ensures that your Lich form damage remains as high as it was before, but that Sigil of Fire and Air and other outside activations don't deal exponential damage. That's all we got for you today. Check out all this and more for yourself on September 9th with the upcoming feature pack. We hope you've enjoyed the skill bar. Please join us again in the future. Bye.